300 miles an hour. So, Madam President, we're here. I have to say we're going to have a caucus in just a few minutes, in 20 minutes. But I can't see us doing anything tonight. I mean, I don't. Last I heard from. Yes.
On that point?
Sure.
I think I can probably speak for everybody on this side that if we had a choice between wrapping all of this up sometime tonight as opposed to coming back tomorrow, I think I'm pretty safe in saying we'd prefer, if it's possible, to complete the job tonight, knowing full well that we're scheduled not to be here next week, and presumably if we finish the job in a way that's satisfactory to both the House and the Senate, I think our preference would be to grind through and try to get to the end tonight.
I understand what my friend is saying, and I'm sure that if we took a vote, everyone would agree on that. But, you know, if we don't get that bill until after midnight tonight, there's a limit as to what we can do. So it may be necessary we come back sometime tomorrow morning. I have a number of us over here who have really important things to do, not only legislatively, but some with their own personal business. So, you know, I understand if we have to come back tomorrow, we'll try to do it as early as possible. But we do have some very serious things to do here. We have millions of people who are struggling because of this disaster relief. And, you know, we talk about disaster relief if it's some number up in the air, but these are jobs we're talking about. These millions of dollars that we're talking about providing for renovation, repair, and all the other things that need to be done for these disaster areas, these are jobs. People are waiting to do that work. And, of course, the CR is very important. So I would hope the House would send us something that is fair and reasonable, because if it's just more of the same yesterday, I don't think they're going to get Democratic votes in the House, and I don't think they get any over here. So they should. This is not a high school game of I gotcha. We're willing to be reasonable, but we're not willing to vote unreasonably. Thank you, Madam President.
Occurs on passage of H.R. 2832 as amended. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Beckich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown in Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Conrad, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Dement, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Noway, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson, South Dakota, Mr. Carey, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen.
Aye.
Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative. Senators voting in the affirmative. Akaka, Baucus, Bekich, Bennett, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Blunt, Bozeman, Boxer, Brown in Massachusetts, Brown of Ohio, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Coates, Cochran, Collins, Conrad, Coons, Durbin, Feinstein, Franken, Gillibrand, Graham, Hagan, Harkin, Heller, Hoven, Inouye, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of South Dakota, Carey, Klobuchar, Cole, Landrieu, Lautenberg, Levin, Lieberman, Lugar, Manchin, McCaskill, Menendez, Merkley, Mikulski, Moran, Murkowski, Murray, Nelson, Nebraska, Nelson of Florida, Portman, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Reed of Nevada, Rockefeller, Sanders, Schumer, Shaheen, Snow, Stabenow, Tester, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Warner, Webb, Whitehouse, and Wyden. Mr. Leahy, aye. Senators voting in the negative. Alexander, Ayotte, Burr, Chambliss, Coburn, Cornyn, Crapo, DeMint, Grassley, Hatch, Hutchison, Inhofe, Johnson of Wisconsin, Kirk, Kyle, Lee, McCain, McConnell, Paul, Risch, Roberts, Rubio, Sessions, Shelby, Boone, Toomey, and Vitter.
there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or wishing to change their vote? Hearing none on this vote. The yeas are 70, the nays are 27. The bill is amended as passed.
Madam President.
The senator from Vermont.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to period of morning business
Without objection.
with Senator Moran to be recognized for up to 10 minutes following the remarks of that senator. The Senate recess subject to the call of the chair.
Without objection.
Madam President, I'm about to suggest you have to quorum, but I see the distinguished senator from Kansas on the floor, so I'll yield to him.
Madam President, thank
The
you.
senator from Kansas.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a historically significant week for the United States and for all those who care about peace and stability in the Middle East. As we know, it's a region that's already roiled by protests and war and faces the prospect now of even more tension, more uncertainty, and potentially more violence. We know this to be the case if the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas goes forward with his plan to seek recognition of Palestine statehood at the United Nations in New York. We've known for some time that this was coming, and thankfully the United States government has expressed opposition to this ill-conceived idea, and the administration plans to direct a veto of the measure. Our government has also worked to persuade other nations to join us in opposing Palestinian statehood bid. But I'm afraid that we have not done enough to convince the Palestinians that there will be consequences for their actions. By pursuing recognition of a state at the UN, President Abbas is choosing confrontation rather than negotiations with Israel. In doing so, he is violating the Oslo peace agreements signed 18 years ago, which state that the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians must be solved through direct negotiations between the two parties. Direct negotiations are not just the best way to achieve peace, they are the only way to achieve lasting peace. Direct negotiations are meant to bring the two sides to the finish line, where all of the final status issues, including borders, can be resolved. By rejecting negotiations with Israel and appealing to the UN, the Palestinians are trying to make the previous agreed-upon finish line the new start line. If President Abbas pursues statehood this week at the UN, the Palestinians will find it more difficult to compromise in the future, given the terms of the state they are seeking recognition for. Israel will also find it more difficult to enter into future talks when the starting point is already an unacceptable result. Years of American efforts to foster peace will be set back, and threats to security will increase once the Palestinians discover that votes in favor of their statehood have not changed any of the circumstances of their daily lives. The Palestinian statehood bid will do nothing to bring Palestinians or Israel peace, for peace cannot be made by votes in the Security Council or the General Assembly. All parties involved stand to lose if President Abbas pursues statehood at the United Nations. Madam President, it's important that the truth be told. Israel is not what stands in the way of a Palestinian state. Neither is the United States standing in the way of a Palestinian state, for both the United States and Israel have endorsed the creation of that future state. What prevents the state's creation is the Palestinian refusal to recognize Israel as a Jewish state with historical rights going back thousands of years to the land and to Jerusalem. The Palestinians must recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state and must return to the negotiating table. Rejecting these terms and instead going to the United Nations will result in widespread repercussions. The Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people rely heavily upon international donors and support. Chief among those benefactors are the American taxpayer. Last year, Americans sent about $550 million to the Palestinians. In June, this Senate unanimously passed a resolution co-sponsored by 90 senators, including me. That resolution stated that the Senate's intent to consider reductions and restrictions on aid to Palestinian Authority should it continue its efforts to circumvent direct negotiations by turning to the United Nations. My request this evening of my colleagues is that we should abide by this resolution. There must be consequences. Lasting peace requires it. Madam President, I would note the lack. I yield the floor.
Order. The Senate stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair.